We're now moving into council time, March 2nd, 2022. This is a Wednesday, having completed a work session on the amended annual construction program. In council time, we begin with old business. And item 1.1 is shown on your agenda as 1406 sales tax funding. And I understand that Roy Johnson, Executive Director of VHA, is here to speak on that.
Chair Bowerman, just before, this is just a reminder that the council did provide some funding to the VHA for this last year, and also asked for Mr. Johnson to return to share what the funding was used for. So this is a follow-up to council's request from last year. And I know that Mr. Johnson is on, as well as Vanessa from Community Services.
Great. Go ahead. Should we go with Roy first?
Happy to speak. Good morning, Chair Bowerman and councilors and Ms. Gaston. Appreciate the opportunity to come back and speak to you about the funds. First off, sound check, hearing me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, we appreciate the commitment of the $600,000 of the funds from the 1406 in 2021. So I wanted to report on the use of the funds and then provide a requested use of 2022. So in 2021, that $600,000 was used to assist in the design of our project in Battleground, and it is called the Weaver Creek. We are in the final stages of design, and and we'll also be applying for funding for low-income housing tax credits. And we also have a pending housing trust fund application, as well as a home application with the county. So this will be 80 units, and it will have 20% of the units that will be restricted to households exiting homelessness. So that is the project that the funds were used on for 2021. And I'd like to return to Weaver Creek after I talk about our request for 2022, if that's okay. So if we were to go on to the next slide. And this is Tinney Creek. This is our assisted living for people that are exiting homelessness with behavioral health service needs. And it is just about ready to open up. It probably we'll have it ready to go yet this month, and then they'll start bringing people in. They will be individuals that are Medicaid eligible, and we have Concepts in Community Living as a service provider. It is 40 units, and if we could go to the next slide, I'll just share what we're using, what the cost of the project was. So we did receive trust fund on it. We used tax credits. And then this is the project that the county went for state direct appropriation request for us. And we received 1.7 million on that. And then also from Clark County Mental Health Funding, we received 1.3. And you can see that VHA put in approximately $4 million. So we're pretty excited about that. And our actual request for funding, if the county would commit the 1406 for 2022, is that we wanted to commit 400,000 of it towards our initial year of operations here at Tinney Creek. The reason for that request is because we'll have full staffing, but it'll be a slow process getting everyone enrolled, with units filled, and to be able to get all the Medicaid draws in place. So we will have several months where we will be operating at a deficit, and it would be very helpful and greatly appreciated if we were able to have the assistance of paying during that period of time. VHA already pays a similar amount with our other two assisted living, so adding a third to a deficit funding would would be kind of difficult for us, but that would be our request if the council would consider that. For the remainder of it, if we could go to the next slide, I would be requesting the possibility of whatever amount. I believe that might be 800,000 available this year, somewhere around there. If we could receive the remainder for Weaver Creek for continuation of that project. If we could bring up the last slide. There we go. So Weaver Creek, 80 units. It has been a challenging project to get everything up and going. We're working on trying to bring down the costs so that it is more likely that it would be able to proceed by the end of this year. We have the application pending, as I mentioned, with the Housing Trust Fund, with Commerce, and then we also have a CHIP application in that Battleground will submit on our behalf March 11th, and then this pending home application. The LIHTC application will be submitted following the Housing Trust Fund announcement. So you can see what our breakdown is. So far, the 600 in county sales tax was applied. We'll have a bond, hopefully receive the home funds and the trust fund. And then we still have a gap of $5 million. Again, we're trying to bring down that cost. And what my request was is I wanted to explore the possibility of an ongoing commitment from the county to provide the funds over a span of time so that VHA could provide surety for projects that the 1406 would leverage additional long-term financing. So the funds that we receive from Clark County leverage other additional public funds as well as private funds, and then we're able to do this affordable housing. And if this commitment could be made, VHA would report on the usage to the council annually. We do anticipate that we'll be putting some VHA funds in this as well, but this is just a consideration that I'd put forward if the county is willing to look at a long-term commitment to us. If not, we would still greatly appreciate that consideration of helping us over this difficult period we'll have first year with Tenny Creek operations. Also on the phone is, on the call here is Josh Ollinger. He is the project manager for Weaver Creek, if you have any questions of that. And I'll be happy to answer any questions relative to Tenny Creek. Again, thank you so much for the support, not only in the 1406, but in the county mental health, as well as that appropriation that you sought for us in the past.
And Roy, and we'll come right back to you with questions. First, I'd like to turn to Vanessa Gaston, who's our Clark County Community Services Director, if there's anything that you wish to add in about this topic.
So thank you guys for putting us so quickly on the work session agenda. So I do want to just emphasize that currently right now in the legislative session, there's a huge emphasis on this type of housing that they want counties to be bringing up. And they call it permanent supportive housing to help people who are unhoused, but also intersect a lot with other kinds of issues around behavioral health and medical. And so I do want to commend the Housing Authority because Tenny Creek does exactly that. And then Weaver Creek is also some other options. So Roy and I did have a conversation yesterday about, looks like there's some potential funding coming down more for more permanent supportive housing and rental assistance for that. So they are more on board, definitely on board and working with the nonprofit housing developers to make sure that we can move forward with building this type of housing, because we will not make leeway in trying to get people off the streets if we do not build this kind of housing, because shelters, they can only stay in there for so long. They need housing with the support services attached. And we need different kinds of housing. So I am in full support of both of these. And then also as trying to also think of other ways we could continue to build these projects, finding different things across our county and bringing our providers and particularly the behavioral providers and to kind of help support to keep people housed.
Thank you, Vanessa. Questions from council?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Minvigi.
So when we first started talking about these behavioral health supported facilities a few years ago, and we're looking at the drawings and financing, it was palpably clear that this is exactly the resource we need to fill a huge gap. Other than shelter space, as Vanessa mentioned, this is the most critical long-term way ahead to return people to productive members of society. Roy, I share your enthusiasm. This is really exciting. Those buildings look beautiful. But then at the end here, all that enthusiasm was tempered. And I had one ongoing question, and that was also identified a few years ago. At some point, and I'm wondering where we're at now, we're going to run out of capability as far as support services. You know, where do all the qualified behavioral health support staff come from? Do we have, especially for Weaver and Tenney Creek, do we have all the staff identified? Are we not running into any challenges with running out of counselors and other social working expertise? And then the issue of being tempered, and I'm hoping Vanessa's correct that we see some additional funding, but a $5 million gap is a huge gap to try to sustain year after year. So I don't know if that's a one-time gap or a sustainment issue. You asked for long-term funding. I know we have a pretty healthy mental health tax fund right now, but boy, that would dissipate very quickly with gaps like this year after year. So those two questions: how are we doing on service staffing on the behavioral support side of it? And where does this gap come from, and how do we get rid of it?
Roy, I'll try to answer the first question. So there are a number of statewide groups. I'm on one of them. So the Balmer Group has given some money to the University of Washington to tackle this very issue, to look at the workforce issues for behavioral health. It is very complicated because if you're going to be licensed, you have to have a degree. And then you got to go through the licensing process. So I know the Department of Health is also looking at ways to be efficient around that. But the other thing that is our behavioral providers are also in conversation with, and we are trying to think about how can we do a pilot to look through some of these and work through some of these challenges, is they're looking at how can they hire more peers. And there is a certified training that they do for what they call mental health peers. And there's also what they call recovery coaches, people who have lived experience in the substance abuse world, but also mental health, to try to hire more of that. So that's also kind of an economic thing where you're hiring people who are probably unemployed, giving them gainful employment. They have experience in the system, and they work very closely with licensed behavioral health staff. So that way you leave your licensed behavioral health staff to actually do treatment and not be trying to do a lot of the care coordination and case management that maybe the peers can do. So they're trying different ways to free up staff so that they could really focus on and work them to their highest potential or for their credentials. So we do have a shortage across this country, across this state, but I think they're trying to find strategies to try to address the problem now, while they're also trying to figure out how do they address it long term. They're also trying to figure out different ways to recruit people to come into behavioral health, like maybe loan forgiveness or something, so that to convince people, but you have to work into the community behavioral system for a period of time. So they're trying to find creative ways, more long-term, but there are some short-term strategies. So it's not stopping us, because we do have our behavioral health providers who are trying to look at the more peer type model. And I would say at this time, you know, we do have Catholic Community Services is working very closely with the Bridge Housing, with Columbia River on different kind of models. And then we have been trying to figure out, are there other behavioral providers who maybe want to come here and serve? And we're just really trying to look at all possibilities at this point. There's no easy solutions, but I do appreciate people looking, being creative about what can we hire and what can we do now. So.
Okay, and if I could add to that too, for one thing, we have the benefit of working in a county where we have Vanessa Gaston, who is driven to address these issues with behavioral mental health. And we also have very good working relationships, collaborations with providers. Right now, we work very closely with CMAR, Lifeline, Columbia River Mental Health, and Andy Silver, who is with the Housing Authority, heads up our tenant service program, and he's had very good outcomes working with Vanessa with various groups. What I wanted to, with Kinney Creek, just quickly, this is going to be a challenging project. That's, we know that going in, as far as to get it fully leased up and then stabilized. Concepts for Community Living is only doing the care there. They won't be doing the mental health provision, so that will be external providers. And you did hit on something, Councilor Medvedji. They had a lot of trouble with the hiring, and that's part of the gap that we're seeing, is that they had to increase the salaries. Relative to the 5 million, that's just for the development. That is just for the Weaver Creek. That is just for the construction. That's a one-time, and VHA will be stepping up to assist in filling that too. We just look for other resources at the same time. So hopefully that answers your questions.
Other questions from council? I noticed that you have down there at the bottom of this slide, gap options, county bond using 1406 or VHA loans for the future. Comments on those?
What my thought was is because the county could use this as a source of a bond to give a one-time loan to the project, soft loan, or either just make some kind of commitment that it'll be available every year so that we'd be able to do the same.
I have a follow-up question to that, Karen, if I might.
Go ahead, please.
And I don't know if there's anyone on this call that can really answer it as far as basically the structure behind ARPA. Are we able to use ARPA money for loans? Can we structure refinancing of that money to allocate it to as a loan instead of just an outright commitment to pay it? I mean, are there rules that would allow us that creativity?
I would have to follow up with the auditor's office that have all the intimate details of how ARPA funding can be used, but we can certainly follow up with them.
Sure.
And for
Yes.
projects like this that, I mean, it'd be really way down the road before there'd be any repayment capability. It'd be during refinance periods and such.
Councilor Olson?
Thank you. Hi, Roy. Thanks. Nice to see you. So I heard a couple things, and I just was wondering if I could get maybe more detail if you have it. You talked about, receiving some sort of commitment over time. And I don't know if I actually heard how much you're asking for specifically and for what period of time, or are you looking for some money to fill like a gap, for instance, with regard to Weaver Creek and potentially Tenny Creek in terms of project type funding? And then what sort of commitment literally are you looking for from the county in terms of overtime, and for how long, or is this in perpetuity, or kind of what are your expectations there so we actually really know what your ask is?
Sure. So, one approach would be that I believe the 1406 is 20-year period or so, that the county could actually bond that now and get the full amount, and then use it for affordable housing projects. And so then you'd be able to, divvy it out to various projects at one setting. Otherwise, if not wanting to do that, if we could just have a commitment that we would, for a 10-year period or something, that there would be a certain amount that we would be able to use for debt financing towards Weaver Creek. So that we're actually able to leverage a larger bond if we knew that there was an additional $600,000 coming a year, that type of thing. Does that answer your question?
I think so. It's getting there. I think the question becomes, if it's a one-time ask, is there ARPA money potentially available for that? If it's a long-term ask, and is this a mental health sales tax fund ask that we can plan out over the next 10 years, that we've got $600,000 a year for you out of that particular fund? And I think just having some specifics can help us figure out what we can and can't do or are willing to do, and where those resources would come from now and over time.
So just to clarify, from Councillor Olson's point, I don't, and Roy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he's asking for an appropriation of the mental health sales tax. I think he's asking for the 1406, which is a different, those are different funds. So the 1406 funds, the council had previously said, well, we're not sure what we're going to do with these. And so there was a one-time decision in 2021 to say we're going to pass through these funds to the VHA. And statewide, many jurisdictions have passed through their funds to their local VHAs. And so I think what Roy's getting at is, can we have a longer term agreement that the county will pass through our funds to the VHA so that they can better leverage those dollars? And I will say on the Housing Trust Fund, just speaking as that as an example, to be able to come in and say, we as a VHA, we as a housing authority have commitment from our local jurisdiction for 5 years, 10 years, that will receive their 1406 funds, that's going to make their application more appealing and more likely to be funded by the Housing Trust Fund. So even without any additional dollars, that leverage point on having a 5-year or a 10-year commitment or longer is helpful for them above and beyond even just the dollars that they would receive on an annual basis.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you, Lindsay, for that clarification.
And I just also want to clarify too, when I see in his slides about where it says like mental health funding, correct me if I'm wrong, Roy, but I think that's coming from my department. So it's a lot of it's mental health property tax. So it's in my budget, baseline budget already. So I don't believe Roy has gone through the RP process and asked for funding. We put money aside specifically to build housing for people with behavioral issues that are homeless. And so I believe that's the funding, Roy, correct, that's coming from my department, because I don't believe you've done a part of the RP process.
Yes, thank you both Lindsay and Vanessa for clarification of the funds I'm referring to, but I'm not familiar with the source. I worked with Vanessa on the fact that this would be behavioral health, and the source was something that she worked on.
So, Madam Chair, I think this is all great discussion. My takeaway is that we need to put more of a laser on these funding resources and what would allow for it. And thanks, Lindsay, for clarifying the 1406 money. My recollection was it wasn't that much money. It was less, or right around 100,000 a year.
It's about $600,000 a year.
I'm sorry, say that again. How much?
It's about $600,000 a year. Obviously, it's pegged with the sales tax. It's a credit against the state sales tax. So as the nature with any sales tax, it fluctuates, with our sales tax. But yeah, it's about $600,000 a year.
Okay, so I may be confused on which tax we're talking about then, because I don't remember it being nearly that much. And certainly I do remember the discussion about the sales tax. I am thinking of going to VHA as a pass-through, and certainly I would support that if we don't have a higher or better use for it. And they certainly are documenting and doing exactly what this community needs in filling a gap. So I think we need to really take a laser view on how much money from where over time. These are all good asks, Roy. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
What Vanessa had indicated about the state support. So that is something that may change the picture a little bit in the future for the better, which would be very helpful, but we'll see. Roy, did you start to say something? I think I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I'm terribly sorry for that. No, I was just saying thank you for the opportunity today.
And I believe we need to know when our next update is going to be, when all this laser focus is going to come about. How is the scheduling on that? Do we have another update scheduled, or are they coming on a regular basis, or what's the plan there?
So Vanessa, it's my understanding that the question today before the council was whether there would be a commitment for 2022 to continue to pass through these 1406 funds. And then if the council would be willing to also do a commitment beyond 2022. So that would be the first threshold question for the council today. And then I would assume that Roy and Vanessa would be happy to come back at certain intervals to provide updates to the council to talk about use of those funds.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
just, yeah, correct. So like last year, you guys approved for just 1 year. So he's coming back today to give you update on how he spent the funds last year. He's asking again for funding for 2022. And you can approve that and just say, we'll take it year by year, or you can add, he's also saying, can you do multi-year on ongoing commitments? So you guys have a couple options to consider.
Chair?
yes. Go ahead.
I had a couple of questions. Roy, for the commitment for this year, do you have a timeline, a date by which you need it, that would affect other dates that you need to know, that you need to pay some bills, whatever it is?
If we would be able to get a response within 60 days, that would be very helpful, because Tinney Creek will have been open by then, and we will have, we do have some reserve built into it.
Thank you. My second comment or question is I'm supportive of continuing this, and I would be supportive of committing the 2022 funds. The reason I wonder about the timeline is I am also interested. We've had some discussions for the duration of talking about this 1406 money, about how to make it work as hard as possible for us. And I do think that bonding against it probably is one of the ways to make it go much further. So we have not yet, I believe, requested or seen information on what that could really mean, like real-time information on if we were to bond now, what that would mean for the funding available and how we could go forward. So I'd love to see some information on that, if it were possible to get it within the timeline that Roy just expressed of 30 to 60 days, because if we commit 2022 money, then that would mean we wouldn't have it available to move forward into potential bonding. So if we were able to use the 2022 funds more expeditiously, then I'd like to do that. So I'd like that information before making a decision to commit, though I want to be clear that I am in favor of the ongoing commitment and continuing to advance these initiatives.
Sure.
Yes, that sounded like Councilor Olson.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, and just kind of following on Councilor Lentz, I think I agree. I think it would be if Vanessa and Kathleen and Roy or whomever can really put a laser focus, as Councilor Medvey said, put a pinpoint on this so that we can have real numbers in front of us and a real timeline. I think all of us support the direction that we're going here. It's just really trying to get to the details of what this looks like, what short-term and long-term funding might look like, and how we can best utilize the funds that we have. So I don't know how quickly you all could do that, but I would be supportive of a little bit more detail and then the best way to go forward to maximize the funds that we have.
So Kathleen, do you suggest a timeline for hearing back from VHA, Community Services, and yourself?
I would recommend allowing me to talk with all of them offline and bring back a time frame next week.
Okay.
Just because I know everybody's got different work priorities at the moment, and so I want to be mindful of that and not put a timeline out there that's not reasonable. So I'll bring this back next week with the suggested time frame.
And I think going forward, knowing that there is a sense of support from council for this, just so that we know specifics and timelines and how the funds would be used and not used and how the state fits in, all of that will help us in making a good policy decision on that. So thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, so I think we've all articulated the same thing. I just circle back to Kathleen and about my question on creativity with ARPA funds and structuring loans that maybe Mark Gassaway or whatever staff you think is appropriate to also look at that additional issue as we look at more detail on how we move forward with this.
Yes, I've already sent them a message. So I was hoping to hear back by the end of the meeting. I have not heard back yet, but I will certainly communicate that back.
Thank you. Now we move to item 1.2 with thanks to those who just presented on the 1406 issues. The item here is minutes for February 23, 2022. Is there a motion for approval?
Motion to approve, Madam Chair.
Second?
Second.
All those, is there any discussion, corrections? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are passed as written. And now we move to item 1.3, the ethics ordinance. This is a continuation of our discussion last week with a very different and much improved draft in front of us. Kathleen, would you wish to begin the discussion on this?
I'd like to actually hand this over to Lindsay, as she's the one that provided the updates to the ethics ordinance, and just summarize the differences and if there's still any differences between what this and what was approved by the community in November.
So I'm happy to talk about this. I may turn it over to Leslie at the end. I know last night she sent out an email with some additional thoughts on a couple of issues, and I'll let her explain that. I don't see her right now, but I think she's here. So what you have in front of you, oh, there she is. So what you have in front of you is a shortened version. This really pares it down to everything that's contained within the charter amendment. And start the same whereas, really those are in there, but the code of ethical conduct basically saying that Clark County is going to adhere to the requirements of state law. There are a couple of provisions within chapter 42 RCW that describe ethical requirements as it pertains to local public government employees. And then really using the language that comes out of the charter regarding any elected official and county employee will be subject to the provisions. And I'll let Leslie talk about the other folks. We discussed that last week in terms of appointed committees, advisory boards, all of those that receive money through the county budget, including contractors, vendors, and the like. So we can discuss that in a minute. The Ethics Review Commission, I kept it as being comprised of 3 members. That can be changed, but that's a fairly standard number. Larger jurisdictions use a larger commission. Pierce County, I think, is 5, for example. And that they need to be qualified individuals in the area of ethical conduct and governance, but otherwise there's no qualifications beyond that. And that if they determine that a violation has been substantiated, that they'll take action that they deem appropriate, including public admonishment, public resolution of censure, or any other action that's allowed by law. And then again, following along the charter, the Ethics Review and Oversight Office, the creation of that office, and the operation of an ethics hotline, and requiring that the county manager to ensure some available staff for the Ethics Review Commission, similar to what we do, as Kathleen mentioned, for the Parks Advisory Board. So I'm happy to answer questions about that, but I think it may be good to have Leslie talk about those other questions that we discussed last week.
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, Council. I sent some comments. Essentially, one of the suggested changes I had to the part that talks about the Code of Ethical Conduct under 2.07.01 was just to include, where it says any elected official, would be to include any appointed committee or advisory board member. And then I just added the word county to employee, just so that would be reflective of what the charter says. And in addition, under 2.07.02 for the Ethics Review Commission, I just suggested change where it talks about members must be qualified individuals in the area of ethical conduct in government, just because that also is in line with the charter language. I know that the council had questions last week about whether or not this applies to, could be contract employees or vendors. And while the charter section is fairly broad in that it could apply to those contractors or vendors, it's not clear to me that a county ethics code it would be difficult for the county to perhaps investigate and assess some type of penalty to an outside contractor or vendor. My suggestion in that regard would be, there are contracts that we would have with vendors and contractors, and potentially could look at either severing that contract or saying that there's some sort of violation of the contract terms and deal with it in that way. But that, again, this is just a suggestion to the council in your discussion. The other question I had was whether the PA's office would provide legal support to the Ethics Review Commission, and the answer to that is yes. That is one of the PA's duties under the statute. So our office would provide legal advice to the commission if requested. And I think that was the basis of my comments and suggestions. The only other thing I wanted to point out is, and I did attach the HR policy that already talks about the code of ethics for employees, just as a guideline to you to show, what the county already requires from its employees. And I guess actually that brings me to my last point, which is that when we're talking about the ordinance and what type of perhaps sanction if there was a violation, that my suggestion is that there be some language in there about employees, because there would have to be a different process for employees, because some of those employees would be subject to a collective bargaining agreement. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Chair, this is Kathleen, and you are muted as well. But I also wanted to just, and I know Leslie and I didn't talk about this, I don't think yesterday, but we do have whistleblower language as well in the HR policy. So nothing in this ordinance is going to hinder that process. So there is an avenue in which employees can also bring forward information, not necessarily through this ordinance, but through the appropriate agency identified for whistleblower, and they have protections under that as well. So that was all I wanted to add.
Question on the Ethics Review Commission set of paragraphs. Do we need to add on number 3? Well, let's see. If the commission determines that the violations are substantial, the commission may take such action as it deems appropriate, including but not limited to, and then it lists the things, or any action as allowed by law or applicable collective bargaining agreement. Does that need to be added?
So what I would suggest is to include language of saying that if the commission finds violation by a county employee, that the county manager may take additional action as allowed or required by county policy or an applicable collective bargaining agreement.
That's what I'm referring to, yeah, because it does go beyond what's allowed by law there. So I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah,
and
so I can add that.
Kathleen too.
Staff, can you scroll down just a little bit for me? I just wanted to see that. Yeah, you can certainly identify both policy and CBA, or you can just say, or you can be more generic too and just say the county manager will take appropriate steps, because regardless, we have to follow the law with regards to bargaining, and bargaining doesn't necessarily give you the prescribed steps to take. There is flexibility in due process and the steps of discipline. So, we have to do that by law. We can certainly put that in there, or we can just say as deemed appropriate by the county manager.
whatever language you decide on, I think getting that concept in there is good. My second question is on the next paragraph, Ethics Review and Oversight Office. I'd feel more comfortable by stating where that office is administratively housed. And I believe that's with the county manager. So if we could just state that, I'd feel a little more comfortable there.
Kathleen, is that something that we're good to add that language?
It would be under the county manager, but I do believe that our staff in the office, because again, this is not a full-time FTE, it's somebody who's going to be the intake of the calls and providing that information to the Ethics Commission and then help support their meetings if necessary. But yeah, I would just say I would think under county manager would be appropriate because I have looked at, for some reason if our staff is overburdened, there is staff across the hall, down the hall from us that also is under the county manager, but not necessarily in our office here, that could also potentially provide some support. So I think just maybe under the county, I'll have to look at what
So the exact language now says that the county manager will ensure available staff to support the Ethics Review Commission. I can also just add that the county manager will ensure staff support for the Ethics Review Commission and the Ethics Oversight Office. And so that
I'm sorry, Lindsay, excuse me. I wasn't speaking about the provision of staff. I was thinking about where that office is administratively housed.
I know, but I think what Kathleen is saying is that that office may be administratively housed within the county manager. It may be administratively housed in the future in a different area, perhaps, I don't know, HR or some other location where there is the staff.
Got it. And I believe that would still be under the county manager. I'm thinking, let's not take it over to PA or some other place,
So we can say that it would be under the direction of the county manager, or under the county manager.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so that way it would not go under an elected official, and to make sure that, or a separate elected, just to ensure that we're in compliance with that, what was approved.
Other questions or comments from council?
Madam Chair,
Chair?
I have a few.
Right.
Go ahead, Councilor Lentz.
I wanted to clarify something that was in one of your notes, Leslie, in 20701 number 2. Your second note is about referring to the code of ethical conduct contained herein. Are you indicating that we should be more specific and reference the HR policy or something else? Your note says that we seems to be indicating that we should, and I'm just wondering what your suggestion or guidance on that is.
I'll jump in here real quick, Leslie. What I have updated it as a suggestion is to say accused of violating section 1, and that will jump back to just the state law. Because previously we had a longer code of ethical conduct in the draft. And so when I made the updates, I didn't change the language. So that would be just referring then back to the section 1 of that section. But
okay. Leslie, was that what you were thinking?
Sure, that's fine. I mean, I think maybe if I just wanted to make sure that whoever is going to be on this Ethics Review Commission knows what it is that they're evaluating to determine, what is a violation of code of ethics. So I was just trying to think of what language could be in there to make it clear to them when they're evaluating it. Are they then going back to the statute? It just wasn't clear to me.
Well, and I appreciated you raising it because it's also not clear to me. And I guess, we have a strong HR policy that, was included with this email and that we can look at. I suppose that it's a little odd to me if we have an ordinance around ethics and we don't cite or reference or tie it in some way to our HR policy that already exists. So I understand, I can see tying it back to the RCW, but I guess I'm also interested in tying it to our HR policy.
Would it be something that we could say that Clark County adheres to the requirements of state law, including but not limited? I mean, the requirements of state law and our own internal policy as it applies to county employees. I'd want to make sure that it's something that our policy can continue to be updated even in the absence of an ordinance change.
I completely agree with that. And I much prefer the idea of referring to policy as opposed to referring to the specific lines of policy, or even the number if that changes. But I think if we're going to refer back to item 1 in item 2, then it would be my opinion that item 1 should reference county HR ethics policy.
And just to jump in, can we just reference this county HR policy section 123, just very briefly, that section of the code, the policy that talks about ethical conduct?
That's certainly what I'm looking for. Just that we just make sure that that's in there.
Can you
in whatever the best way is to do
Lindsay?
it.
I think just referencing HR policy, so get like Lindsay said, it gives us flexibility because we are revising our HR policies right now, just in case numbers change, that part won't change. A question that I have though in lines of this as well is, I know that, Lindsay had scaled this back per the direction of the council, but do you want language in here that has examples, which we have in our HR policy? So it could be, unethical conduct may include, but not limited to these items. And these items are not considered ethical or unethical conduct. Just for, we don't have to. We certainly have the parameters to policy and state law, but I didn't know for any community member who's reading it, an interpretation of what that really means and providing that clarity. Is that something that you're interested in?
So to jump in here real quick, what I've drafted is Clark County adheres to the requirements of state law, including Chapter 42 RCW and Clark County Human Resources Policy. Does that, Kathleen, work?
That works. But my question to council is, do you want any examples of what this could look like or not, does not include?
Sure.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
Thank you. Yeah. So I don't know that I would want to include that in there. I think it might be limiting or less than. I think if we have the resource that we can refer back to, and I'm hoping that once this is adopted, that maybe that current HR policy is connected to it, so people could go right to it if they needed to look at what those. I wouldn't want to complicate it by, if it's not on there, then it's not a violation of it, because it could be so broad that including it here might make it a little bit more. I don't know. So just generally, I'm thinking maybe not, but I would certainly take some other feedback.
I think the RCW on that is very good also, which is referenced. So that gets to the person who's going to even call in on the hotline could easily look that up. So I agree with you, Councilor Olson. I don't think that needs to appear here. Is there any other feedback on that?
Well, feedback on just that, I concur with what was just stated, but I have additional comments in general on different
Okay,
aspects.
go ahead, Councilor Mukherjee.
So the first issue that I bounced back and forth with Lindsay last week, and I didn't know that it was resolved here in my skimming of it this morning. The terms are to be staggered, yet we don't have a description on how to stagger them. So that was one threshold question that maybe I missed it, Lindsay, but if you understand what I'm saying, each 3-year term is supposed to end at a different time, but to start this process, someone's going to have a shorter term, or they're, 1-year term, 2-year term, 3-year term, or some other mechanism to get them to become staggered in the future.
Yes, I will add that language to have it be staggered. Yes.
Okay, my main concern is it gets to a broader issue, and for the public, if there is any public listening or will listen to the recording, we had a number of ethical complaints And we suspended our process because the process we had was completely unworkable. And then we started to reform it, but maintained the suspension of the rules until we could get something that was workable. And then the charter amendment passed, and so we're merging it. We had yet again, and I just want to acknowledge another complaint, and I'm not commenting on whether it's valid or not. But the main issue we experienced with all of those prior complaints, bar maybe one or two, was that they didn't fall. They weren't ethical complaints. They weren't code of conduct complaints. And one of the gaps we have, and I think we still have, is that there's no threshold for whether the complaint is even comes within this purview. You know, if someone doesn't like what a council member says, policy-wise or otherwise, that's not a basis of an ethical complaint. Yet we saw a lot of those. So, you know, where the language shall be subject to review, and then later down to 207.02 and 2, it gets to a quantum of proof whether the committee believes it warrants an investigation. I think that's poor language, because it sounds like a mandatory investigation, even though it may not even be an ethical or code of conduct complaint. So there needs to be some language in here that whether or not, as a threshold issue, whether the complaint even meets the definition to fall within the purview of this review commission. And I think that we're missing that, and that's going to cause some problems in the future if we don't change some of this language around, because it's not an automatic must shall review, and insufficient evidence or sufficient evidence is really a quantum of proof issue, not an element of the offense issue. So we need to get to the element of the offense, if you will, whether it even qualifies to be considered. So those are my comments.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councillor Lentz.
I have a question for you, Councillor Medvedji, on that. I hear where you're coming from, and looking at the language, I'm just curious if you feel are cause and evidence equivalent? I'm just looking at 20702 number 2. The commission will conduct a review of the allegations and determine whether there is sufficient cause to warrant an investigation. I'm wondering if there are just some small language checks we can do here, because I agree with what you're saying. I'm just wondering if the language may already do it, or what small changes, hopefully small, we can make to do that. So I guess my original question was,
I was focusing on exactly that language, and basically what I wanted to have a few words changed that it even meets the definition of an ethic complaint versus there's sufficient evidence to warrant an investigation, because those are two different things.
Right, and that's, you're using the word evidence, and the word we have is cause. And so my first question is just, are those considered equivalent? And if, maybe that's a question also for legal or
Well, what I would say is that having evidence and cause are different. If you require somebody to have evidence, they may not have it. For example, if an employee hears through the rumor mill that something happened, that employee may not have any evidence that that happened, but the allegations may be very serious and would be cause to warrant an investigation to say, wow, if that really is true, then we need to investigate and find out what happened, but that person may not have evidence.
Yeah, so I think a direct answer to your question is no, they're not equivalent words. I think Lindsay's right in that. And so that's why I'm suggesting we add a few more words. I missed one point that I wanted to add that Leslie addressed earlier in her email. Where the charter is, I wouldn't say vague, but not prescriptive. I think we really need to limit this to employees. And otherwise, we run into contract issues, contract verbiage we're going to have to add to alert potential contractors, they may be subject to this. All of that is very problematic, especially in enforcement, becoming a breach of contract. So I think the better course is to actually exclude that, as long as it doesn't conflict with the charter language, but make it clear that this is only employees and us.
I concur with that, Councilor Midridge, and I think that is an important thing for staff to deal with internally when a contractor or vendor or whomever has had a violation there. I'd also wonder if something as simple as this is what you're thinking of on 2.0702, paragraph 2. The commission will conduct a review of the allegations and determine whether there has been an ethics violation by definition, and whether there is sufficient cause to warrant an investigation and so on. Just something as simple as that addition. Does that work?
Yeah, I agree. I think you could probably use a lot less words, but that would be for Lindsay and Leslie to parse through. But that's exactly my point.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Chair Bauman, I agree with you. I think just adding those 2 or 3 words clears that up. So does it meet the definition of ethical conduct or not? And if it doesn't, then we move on.
Yep. Other comments? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Chair Bauman. I just back to the last conversation about employees and appointed. So I think Leslie had maybe some suggested language there. And I'm trying to figure out if that's actually in this draft or it's in the one she sent us.
I don't think it's there. It's added under 2.07.01 paragraph 2.
Right.
So it would just say any elected official, comma, and then it has appointed committee or advisory board member, and then I added county before employee.
At one point in your message, you also said temporary employees and volunteers. That sounded appropriate. Maybe that's assumed, but I liked your addition of it, Leslie.
I mean, certainly that's up to the council to do that. I think I included that because that's what the HR policy references, that it covers temporary employees and volunteers. So I think, my suggestion would be, since if we're adding the language to the first part that it includes HR policies, you may not need to actually include temporary employees and volunteers here, but that's certainly up to the council.
Big picture look for a moment, if we may. I believe that our purpose here this morning is for staff to receive feedback before the public hearing. Is that correct, Kathleen?
Yes, that is. So the schedule that we were looking at is that this would go to a public hearing on April 5th. But I think what I would recommend today is allow Lindsay to take the feedback from today, update the draft ordinance, send it to Leslie for her final review. And then let's just do one more check on this next week during council time. That still gives us enough time for the April 5th hearing.
Okay. So April 5 is still the public hearing, but we'll have an update next week. Does that sound okay to council? Certainly does to me. Okay, very good. Let's move to new business. Thank you for that good discussion, everyone. Item 2.1 is the Wasak annual courthouse meeting, April 8th.
So staff was reached out by Wasak. Eric Johnson is their executive director, and they are doing, I think it's kind of like a roadshow where they're meeting with counties throughout the state, and they're going to be in our area on April 8th. And are asking for an in-person meeting with the council on that date from 10 to noon and to discuss some updates from Wasak. Apparently they have done this historically. They call it a courthouse briefing. Not quite sure I was asking that question, but it's how they describe these conversations that they have with their stakeholders throughout the state. And so one question is does the council want to move forward with this conversation with Wasak? And also, like I said, they are proposing to do this in person on April 8th.
What day of the week is that?
It's a Friday.
Yes,
Friday?
it'll be a Friday.
So a Friday, 10 to noon in person.
And
Yes.
Kathleen was correct. They have historically done these prior to COVID. These were something they would do, these road shows every legislative interim. So.
And depending on, if something changes with COVID and stuff, we can look at doing hybrid as well if council wants options of not in person. But they will physically be here as they are traveling throughout the state.
And Kathleen, is this a solid date for them, or are they flexible?
Yes, because they're meeting with all the counties in our area over that time frame. So this was the time frame that was allotted for Clark County.
They're going to be down here for 2 to 3 days. So, if we wanted them to come from 9 to 11 on this day, or, if all of the council is available on Thursday, but not Friday, we can certainly go back to Wasak, but they're down here for 2 to 3 days. This would be their ideal schedule. Yes, they've blocked out this time for Clark County, but at the same point, there is some flexibility.
Not that I'm opposed in any way, but just curious, what is their purpose with us for 2 hours?
As you can see on the agenda there, it's really talking about all the topics and legislative items that they have been working on, as well as hearing the county specific issues. And it looks like Lindsay was going to share, and she might have more information.
In all candor, they recognize that the counties are the ones funding them. So this is sort of part of their roadshow to say, here's all of what we're doing and how can we serve you with the money that you give us.
And just certainly the council can decide. I'm not gonna be here on April 8th, but press ahead without me if necessary. But if there's any flexibility, that'd be great too. But whatever y'all decide is fine.
If we ask for Thursday, April 7, would that fit better with everybody's schedule?
It would fit better with mine.
I believe that I'm available. How about you, Councilor Medvigi and Lance?
If it is if it is 10 or later, and ideally 11 or later, but I could make 10 work, then the 7th would be A-okay.
So I'm very interested in meeting with them and hopeful the majority, if not all the counselors, can meet with them as well. And I am at your disposal. So I will make myself available whichever time and day that you select.
Well, it would be good to have hopefully 5 of us there. So that would be a request to them for Thursday the 7th from 10 to noon. And if they can't accommodate that, tell them that all of our council can't be there on the 8th and see if they have a proposal. I don't know what their days are here. Okay. Let's move to item 2.2, District 5 interviews discussion. Kathleen?
Yes, so as we know, Councillor O'Brien retired effective yesterday, and Chair Bowerman has submitted and put forward 3 nominees to fill her position. So this is really just a discussion on dates for interviews that the council would like to move forward with interviews of the 3 candidates that have been put forward.
I would like to look at dates that are March 10 and prior, if we could, please. When it was felt by a couple of counselors that having the interviews today was rushing, I did reach out to the 3 nominees and ask them when they are not available. So I have that information, and we'll provide that depending on, if they don't coincide with what your preference is for the interviews. I won't even go into that, but what is your preference for interviews? Clearly not today.
Well, I'll speak up on an additional issue as well. So number one, I really hope that we can all come together and do this as quickly as possible. I didn't think today would have been rushing it if we were available. I understood that there were scheduling issues. So I'm looking for the first available date to do it. Did we ever do a press release on who all the nominees were? And
Yes, of course we did. That was back on Thursday of last week.
of all, and not just your list of nominees, but those that were considered, because I've had constituent, and there was one in a chat yesterday with our meeting.
No, there was no, in answer to your question, no, there was no press release on that, Counselor. That was obtained through other means through open
Right.
information.
So I saw it published in the Columbian, but for transparency, I think somehow the county should either post it or do a press release on all those were considered. Obviously, we had no part in that. It was only the chair. And so I think the public was asking.
I'm sorry, Counselor Midvigi, I shared with all of the applicants at the time that I spoke with them that I personally would not be releasing all of their names, but that it was something that was available through open information if requested, and it was requested. But I don't see a need to put those names forward from myself or from the county, actually. What would be the purpose in doing that?
Transparency.
Transparency of who applied and was not named as a nominee? I don't think so. I mean, it's out there in the public arena now. If someone wants to know, it's readily available by a Google search now. So when would you want to go ahead with those interviews?
So if the first date is the 10th, I'm good with that.
That's the last date. If we could have it anytime from tomorrow through the 10th.
I'm available.
I'm looking at my calendar and I don't have a lot of availability before the 10th.
When is your availability, Counselor Lentz?
After the 10th. I'm looking and I just don't have blocks that are available.
What is your block on the 11th?
I will be away at a conference with CTRAN.
So are you available on the 11th by remote?
No, and I've already given you that information.
So when is your first availability? You said after the 10th.
Well, I will be back. I should be attending council time meetings on the 16th.
And that is between now, which is March 2nd, your very first availability for the interviews, March 16.
Well, the 16th also looks busy because we have meetings scheduled that day already. And the 17th and 18th, I'm pretty full as well.
How about you,
Looks like-
Counselor Olson?
So, oops, I am out, literally out, the week of the 14th and the week of the 21st. So anytime after that, certainly, and I'm, depending on Councilor Lentz's schedule, I could have time before that. I'm out on the 11th as well.
How about tomorrow?
I'm available, Madam Chair. Give my best efforts to the county and fill this vacancy. I think it's important to move this process along, not delay it as long. Otherwise, we're looking at, let's just send it to the governor and let him decide if we're not able to even meet.
Our 3 nominees are available, just FYI, tomorrow. Are you available tomorrow, Counselor Lentz?
No, I already had things scheduled. That's incredibly short notice.
Well, you've already had the notice of a week, but didn't wish to do today, or whatever the reason was for not doing it today. So we're going past a week's notice at this
Well,
point.
I want to be, no, actually, I think it was just a couple of days ago that staff was asking about my availability for today and was already scheduled because I have things on my calendar. Knowing that Councilor Olson will be out the weeks of the 14th and 21st, looking at the following week, Tuesday, March 29th, I would have a fair amount of availability in the afternoon.
So we're neither of the other counselors planning on attending any other county meetings that we already have on our calendar. Maybe we could replace those, or just because this is a high priority. All of a sudden you're both not available for many weeks.
I'm literally out of the area those 2 weeks, so.
Are you out tomorrow as well, Counselor Olson?
I'm not out tomorrow, but I wouldn't, if we go forward, we definitely need to have all 4 of us there though. So I wouldn't want to participate unless all 4 of us were there.
We need to have a quorum of 3.
Yeah, well, I won't participate unless all 4 of us are there. So I want to make sure we're all 4 there.
Counselor Lentz, could you listen in tomorrow?
No, I just told you I wasn't available.
I know, but being available is different from just being able to listen in. Actually, well, I'm not going to go into that, but I find waiting until the 29th to be unacceptable, because come the 29th, there could be an additional issue why it would be further postponed. County manager, can you help us?
Okay, so first of all, for any, this would be a special meeting if it's not, and I would recommend a special meeting to have it outside of a normal council time or council meeting. So that requires 24 hours notice. With Councilor Olson being off for 2 weeks, if there's no availability next week, I'm not sure, based on the conversation today, if next week is an option at all. That would be the only, I think, option based on the conversations. If not, unfortunately, it looks like it would be the earliest at the 29th, and we can certainly get that posted. And unfortunately, we can certainly move around county meetings that you may have, but I also know that you may have other obligations that are on schedules that we may not be aware of.
Okay. Let's revisit next week.
Okay.
That would be the 7th through the 11th, Monday through Friday.
So Chair Bauman, I'm out on Friday. I'm on an airplane on Friday.
On the Friday the 4th,
The 11th.
the 11th.
Yeah.
How about the 7th through the 10th?
I believe I'm available depending on depending on what time and what's going on, but I'm here those days.
And
Avail at I'll make myself available during those days at any time that Counselor Olson and you are available. Hopefully,
So-
Counselor Lentz will find a hole in her schedule.
And just to state the main meetings that council does have, that would be, that are normal meetings, there is a special meeting on the afternoon of the 8th at 1 o'clock. This is regarding the hearing on precinct boundary adjustments. That morning, a couple of counselors are on the ECHO meeting. And then Wednesday morning is the Board of Health, followed by council time. So those are items that are a little tougher to move if needed, because they're already been scheduled.
Counselor Lentz, are you available at any time for, let's see, what did we said? 2.5 hours, or was it 2 hours? On the 7th through the 10th.
I'm looking. I really don't think so. I mean, I'm sorry that apparently my schedule fills up a little bit more quickly than others, but I
Are there
really
any
don't.
other meetings there that you could simply look at in a different way, online, TV, or whatever, after the meeting? Or is your physical
No.
presence essential? Or your
Yes, it is. I'm not going to be able to do it.
for those 3 days, there is no opening, or 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, those 4 days, there is no opening at all.
Correct. Well, I've already told you I was unavailable on the 9th and the 10th in separate communications. And on the 7th and 8th, I have a full schedule. I'm sorry that that is the case. I don't have the privilege of being retired. I have many commitments.
Well, it's true. You're not retired. You're hired by the public and get a pretty sizable salary to take
Yes.
care of county business.
And I do get a salary for county business, which I do, and many of these meetings are county business. And also, this is not a job that is assumed to be held as a full-time job. Some of us have to also earn other living, and that is following the spirit and practice of the
Okay, I
charter
don't think we
and the
need to
positions that were
this
created. My
discussion.
having other commitments
Let's figure
is a
out what we're
fact
going to do.
of my situation.
Why don't you go ahead and schedule, Kathleen, a date for the 29th, a time for the 29th. I have not consulted with the nominees for their availability on the 29th, so I will get back to you. What is it? 10:38. I'll get back to you about 1 o'clock with that information. And then we can select a time that also meets with their needs. What time of day meets with Counselor Olson and Lentz's schedule on the 29th?
I have something at 1 o'clock. I'm not quite sure what it is. I'll have to look at it, but otherwise I'm available on Tuesday, the 29th.
And I am available after 10 o'clock.
How about if we tentatively set it for 10 o'clock, Kathleen? Is that okay with you, Counselor Medvigi?
I will make myself available.
Okay. And meanwhile, it will be confirmed with you in writing today whether the 29th is going to work for the nominees or not. And if not, we're back to the drawing table. So,
And so I'm not accusing anyone of deliberately delaying this, but I'm wondering if Leslie is still on, or I see Bill Richardson's name. I'm looking for, maybe we need to, I wasn't kidding, that maybe we just need to send this to the governor because we need this position filled.
I have thought of that, Councilor Medvigi, and I'll be talking with his office.
I'd be curious about the process of just sending it to the governor. Is that something that the council would decide, or?
No, I would send it to the governor's office and he would choose from the list of 3 nominees.
Is that a process that's laid out in the RCW?
Yes.
We don't have to do interviews, you can just send it? I'm just curious. I'm not trying to be combative. I'm literally
Yes.
curious.
I can read what the statute says, just so the council's aware, if that's okay, Chair Bowerman.
Yes.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, I'm not suggesting that that's what we should do, because I think that would be great embarrassment to us. But that's what we may have to do we have to wait a month just to do interviews. And that's what, Battleground, for different reasons, didn't select their open seat and then complained when we selected for them. But, the people have a right to have all 5 counselors on board. And the 5th district now has no representation other than by us. So we really should make it a high priority to make ourselves available for the county business to move this selection along.
Go ahead, Leslie, with that.
Sure.
RCW.
So it's RCW 36-16-110, and it's section 3 that talks about if there's a vacancy that occurs in a nonpartisan county council. And so what it says is that in case, so the first part is that once the office is vacated, it's the council chair who selects the 3 persons. In case the majority of the members of the county legislative authority do not agree upon the appointment within 60 days after the vacancy occurs, the governor shall within 30 days thereafter and from the list of nominees provided for in the section appoint someone to fill the vacancy. So this seems to imply or states that the council has 60 days after the vacancy occurs to either agree or disagree. And if they do not agree within those 60 days, then it would be the governor's decision to pick from the list of nominees.
So it's akin to a pocket veto, though. I mean, there's no language there that talks about the inability to even meet. I mean, it's a pocket veto. It's basically, hey, we don't want to select someone, so let's not make ourselves available to do it. So I would look at the issue of sending it direct to the governor if we're not able to get it done by the 29th.
Well, we're well within 60 days and we're not.
We've already canceled today's meeting and now everyone's not available for a whole month. That's ridiculous.
Well,
We should
send
it out I don't think the law requires a 60-day delay, is what I'm saying, Leslie. So that's what I heard you read. I don't see anything in there that says you can delay it for 60 days. I mean, it's the same issue Battleground ran into. They're not doing the city's business and we're not doing the county's business by not acting on it. Not acting on it is a pocket veto. It's vetoing filling the seat.
The statute doesn't say what the process is to get it to the governor. It just says that if the members of the county legislative authority, which would be the council, do not agree upon the appointment within 60 days, that then the governor has within 30 days after that to pick from the nominees. So it just
Okay.
doesn't state the mechanism that that occurs. It just, that's the language of the statute.
Yeah, that's, I think, just kind of like the same email that was sent on the 24th to the council. So listing their resume and so on. So let's move on. I think this has been exhausted. Councilor reports. Are there any? Hearing none. Work session requests. One is Clark County STEAM health report.
Yes, so counselors, this is for Public Works. They're requesting a work session in April for about 30 minutes, requesting council feedback on the Clark County Stream Health Report. The long-term monitoring efforts for this program began back in 2002. This report has data from 51 streams, and it compares it to 2010 to 2020, the conditions of the water quality. So this is really about submitting that report and obtaining council feedback on that for about 30 minutes.
Is that on the April 13 or 20 again?
That is their preference. What we do is we ask what their preference, but staff in our office here will work on the schedules and with staff to see if we can do it. But if we already have a heavy agenda, we'll push it to a different date. But that's just the Public Works' preference.
Sound okay, council? Okay,
Thank you.
it's a go. Lindsay, policy issues.
Two quick things for you. Wanted to update you on some discussions in the legislature regarding the transportation budget. As you may have seen, the export fuel tax was removed. And so that was the tax that would have taxed 6 cents per gallon on fuel exports out of Washington that primarily would have affected Oregon. Alaska has one refinery and Idaho, and so would have increased the cost at the pump for our neighbors. And that was removed. Unfortunately, the replacement for that is an annual pull from the Public Works Assistance Account, also known as the Public Works Trust Fund. We use this, local governments across the state use this to get loans for their local projects. And historically, the legislature has done sweeps from the Public Works Trust Fund. And at one point, it looked like the Public Works Trust Fund was going to go in, just implode altogether because of the amount of sweeps that had come out of it. So it's unfortunate to see that the legislature is going back to that, but not historically unprecedented. The other thing out of Douglas County, as you also may have seen there, the judge there ruled that the cap gains tax that the legislature enacted was unconstitutional. So we anticipate the AG's office is going to appeal and then it'll end up in the Supreme Court. That tax is set to start collections in 2023. So we should have some information, but the current state budgets are, the forecasts are based upon that cap gains tax being enacted. So we'll see, but the initial result out of Douglas County is that it's deemed unconstitutional as an income tax. That's all I have today.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Quick question for Lindsay.
Yes, Councilor Olson.
Do they know how much they were expected to? I don't remember how much revenue they were expected to raise with that income tax or capital gains tax. Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll get that figure and I'll send it out to everyone.
Great. We are now ready to move into 3 different executive sessions. And one is a pending litigation, RCW 42.30.110(1I) for 15 minutes. Another pending litigation, same RCW, for 10 minutes. And it was not stated in the agenda that there is after action from that particular item, but I understand that there is. Is that correct, Kathleen or Leslie or Kathleen? So
Thank you.
We will have that after action when we come back into council time at the conclusion of the executive sessions. And then there is a third session on collective bargaining for 10 minutes. So that is a total of 35 minutes. So say that it's 10:50, we would be back at what, 11:25? And then at that time, we will give the after action, and it's after that that we'll be adjourning. So I thank you, and we will now move into executive session.
Hello, the council has extended their executive session for 35 more minutes and they will be returning at noon. Thank you. Hello, the council has extended executive session for another 20 minutes and they will return at 12:20. Thank you. The council has extended executive session for another 5 minutes and they will return at 12:25. Thank you. Executive session is being extended for another 5 minutes and they will return at 12:30. Executive session has been extended for another 5 minutes, and they will be returning at 12:35. Thank you.
Chair Bowerman, I believe all the council is resumed if you'd like to reconvene.
Very good. Thank you. We are reconvening council time, March 2, 2022. On Wednesday, we have been in executive session and are back in council time. Is there a motion, Councilor Medvegy, coming out of executive session?
Yes, Chair, this is Councilor Gary Mevji. I do make a motion to grant Sheriff Jeff Atkins and Deputy Sean Boyle and Deputy Holly Desabiria, and forgive me if I mispronounce that name, Deputy, formerly known as Troops Request for the county to provide a defense and indemnification in the lawsuit entitled Susan Zawacki individually, and as personal representative of the estate of Genoa Donald et al. Versus the County of Clark et al. Pursuant to Clark County Code 2.97.025.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are we ready for the vote?
Chair, I have discussion.
Okay, please go ahead. Councilor Lentz.
The county council is frequently asked to indemnify county staff in lawsuits. And that means that we agree that the staff member was on the job, doing their job as trained, and that the training was appropriate. If we agree, then the county takes on the legal representation of that staff person. They're protected by us, indemnified. This process of the council voting whether or not to indemnify is an important part of the checks and balances of government. Unfortunately, indemnity is a somewhat routine decision by this council, and although I do trust our professional staff to give me the advice and information that I need, this time is different. This time, we are dealing with use of lethal force and the loss of a life. That loss had clear impact on the person who was killed. It also had an effect on his family and friends, and on the officers involved and their immediate circle as well. This incident deserves more scrutiny than other routine lawsuits. To help me learn more and make an informed decision, I asked for the documents which the Washington Association of Prosecuting Attorneys used to make their determination that lethal force was justified in the death of Genoa Donald. Their report says they reviewed 2,500 pages of documents. After pressing for the documents again a week later, I did finally receive some of them. Our chief civil deputy acted quickly and gave me what she had received. But what I received was only what she had in her own files, about 1,400 pages. There's an 1,100 page difference between what I, or both she and I, received and what was sent to the group of prosecuting attorneys who determined that lethal force was justified. I don't know what's in those 1,100 pages. I asked for the toxicology report and I haven't received it. I asked for the medical examiner's report and I haven't received it. I also asked for the Clark County Sheriff's Office policies related to traffic stops and use of force. I don't know what those policies are, so I need to read them and know them before making a judgment about them. These should be the easiest documents to produce, and yet I have received nothing. I asked for training materials. How are the deputies trained to use force? How are they trained to do a traffic stop? And I have not received those. While our chief civil deputy was helpful, those documents were not provided by the entities who have them. I have read the 1,400 pages of investigation that I was provided. Based on what I've read, I see many problems that merit complete review of the documents. I have many questions. And it could very well turn out that these problems and questions would be resolved if I could read the documents, but I don't have them to read. I've also read the legal civil complaint filed against the county, and the accusations in it are serious. A man has died at the hands of a Clark County employee. Today, I'm asked to make an informed decision about a case of lethal use of force, the death of Genoa Donald, and without the information that I need to do so. So the only responsible vote that I feel I can make today is to abstain. So that is what I will be doing.
Further discussion?
I would just mention, have a comment, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Process is important for all involved. We as counselors are not litigants, nor are we the attorney for one side or the other. Discovery processes are very confidential, complex, and controlled by a judge. And this will go through a process through our court system that is appropriate. I respect your opinion to abstain, Councilor Lentz, but I think you've stepped outside your, or believe you're stepping outside your counselor role as more of an advocate. So I renew my motion to approve the indemnification. It is the process that gives all parties due process and lives up to our obligations as a county to come to the support in an appropriate legal circumstance for any one of our employees.
Chair, I have a brief response.
Go ahead, Councilor Lentz.
Thank you. You are entitled to your opinion, Councilor Medvedji. Our role as elected officials is to determine how county taxpayer dollars are spent. As I said in my statement, this is a matter of checks and balances. And in many cases, this does deserve to simply be indemnified. That is part of our role. However, in some cases, this does merit additional scrutiny. And I don't believe that asking for the information needed to make an informed decision is outside of the role of an elected official. Perhaps others feel differently. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know you like the last word, but yes, you are entitled to your opinion.
Is there further discussion? Is there a comment that staff or legal advice wishes to make? Okay. It is time to vote on the motion to provide defense and indemnification in the designated lawsuit. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? And those abstaining?
Aye.
The vote is with 4 of us, 3-0-1. The motion is passed. And council time for March 2nd is now adjourned.